Thank you for coming down to today's Sundown drink. Do grab some drinks at the back and continue your networking session. Thank you. Oh, sorry. This one? Can start? Okay.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Hi, welcome to SGInnovate, and thank you for taking your time to attend today's event. My name is Samantha. I'm from SGInnovate, and we are happy to collaborate with our community team to present Sundown Drinks, a talent networking session intended to facilitate interactions between experienced industry professionals, startups, and technical talents. So at SGInnovate, we believe that Singapore has the resources and capabilities to tackle hard problems that matter to people all around the world. And part of our efforts include strengthening the deep tech talent pool through engaging with talents, mentors, with knowledge sharing sessions like the one you are here today. We hope that through tonight's event, you will get an opportunity to meet interesting people and people of similar interests that will have meaningful conversations with. So without further ado, I will hand over the mic to our dearest Simon to start us off. Thanks, Simon.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. The red wine's now open, so feel free if you would like a glass of wine. We're going to have an intimate, I think, quite casual session tonight. For those of you who don't know SGInnovate, we support STEM entrepreneurs to grow deep tech companies. Now, why deep tech? We think deep tech, whether it's artificial intelligence, robotics, next generation computing, or distributed ledger, these are the technologies that can really are critical to solving these big problems that we have. But we know as SGInnovate in building these deep tech companies that talent is so critical. And it's a real challenge for these companies and for other people in the ecosystem. So I have a fantastic bunch of panelists tonight, and I'll invite them up just shortly. And we want to have a discussion about what Singapore can do to really attract more and better STEM talent. I think this is a really important topic. Please, we have Slido going. I think there will be a hashtag up here. You can just log in to Slido, put the hashtag in and ask questions. But I mean, there's not many of us here tonight, so the old-fashioned way is just fine as well. If you want to stick your hand up, we can go like that. So I think without further ado, I'll invite the panelists up, and they can introduce themselves, and we'll go from there. So please give the panelists a hand. Thank you. Oh, we can have a seat. We can have a seat. Oh, yeah, if we could sit under our photos, that would be fantastic. Oh, Dot, you're fine. You're fine. Okay. So I've asked the fantastic panelists next to me to introduce themselves and also share one of the challenges that they had early on in their STEM career. So hopefully we can get a bit of context to these sort of discussions. For me, it was, I'm a scientist, and I only saw one path when I was thinking about my undergraduate studies. If I went science, I would do my undergraduate, move towards a PhD, do a postdoc somewhere, and then I guess maybe be a researcher in academia. And I didn't really see many other paths other than that one. And I think being able to talk about these paths and highlight these paths would go a reasonable step towards attracting more people to STEM. So with that, I'll hand over to Danny here. He can introduce himself, and we can go from there.
Right. Thank you. So I'm Danny. I'm the Senior Director for the Health and Biomedical Cluster within A-Star. And so my background, I'm actually a physician. I trained in Singapore at the National University of Singapore School of Medicine. So that's so many decades ago. And I think pretty much like Simon, the career paths, and I think particularly for physicians, even more so maybe, was always very set and traditional, right? In a sense that you would go through your internship, you would do your, either you decide at some point that you will not do a specialty training, in which case you come out and start up a general practice, or you would go into a specialty training and then you sort of end up in a hospital system, and then at which point you do another bifurcation where you decide to go into private practice or you stay in a hospital. So pretty much during my predecessor's time, 95% of clinicians would end up in one of these three buckets, right? And that's So it was exceedingly unusual for a clinician to decide, well, I wasn't going to go down that path. And for me, it was pretty opportunistic. So I was halfway through a training in anesthesiology, which I actually enjoyed tremendously. But nonetheless, I felt that maybe there's a chance that I could pop out and do something different. And if that didn't work out, I'll come back in. So I decided an opportunity came up to do a job in a pharma company. And so this is an American pharma company, Eli Lilly, that has set up a research unit in Singapore. And I said, well, okay, I've got some background in pharmacology thanks to anesthesiology, so I'll pop in and see what happens. And that turned out really well. So I did 15 years in R&D in Lilly. And at the last part of my career before I left, I was the managing director for the facility. So why did I then move over to A-Star? So right now I head up a group in A-Star looking after programs in drug development, programs in precision medicine and biomanufacturing. So that's kind of my little journey. And if I were to look back, and I think there was maybe just a little bit of a happy accident and maybe some small amount of push factors that made me decide that I wanted to sort of move on to and try something different. And I would have to say that absolutely no regrets, right? There's been lots of ups and downs. No matter where you plant your career, there'll always be that. But I'll say fundamentally the opportunities to learn about yourself, I guess, or myself, opportunities to travel a little bit and get to know people and different cultures, and then also work in an organization in a different way from how you would as an individual contributor. So leading a team, leading an organization, thinking about finances, HR, who to promote, how to set a salary scale, stuff like that. I think all were all good growth opportunities, so no regrets there.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Hui Xian, and I'm currently a faculty at SMU. So I wanted to be very honest with you. When I graduated from school, the reason why I went into doing a PhD was actually because I was actually too afraid to go out to work. I felt that I wasn't ready for the workforce. And then my final year project supervisor encouraged me and said, oh, why not you do a PhD? And I was like, okay. I mean, since I kind of like research, based on my final year project experience. So I said, okay, yeah, and I did my PhD. So yeah, from there, then I got my first job at one of the A-Star institutes, same as Danny. And then I wanted to also relate an interesting incident. During like my first week of work at A-Star, we had an external meeting, and one of the people from the other agencies, public agencies, came over. And I was alone in the meeting room with them, and I introduced myself. And then the person asked, so what do you do? Or what do you do? So I was very new then, and then I couldn't quite understand what was his question about. So I said, the whole team are either scientists or engineers. And then his reply was, are you the PA? Yeah, that was a bit painful, but yeah. So I think that was one of the stereotypes of being a female scientist in the tech space. But yeah, I've moved on from there. So one of the challenges in my career so far, I think, was really when I went from A-Star to SMU, where we work a little bit more on projects that deal with the social sector. And I think when people are in the tech space and have been trained in tech, we tend to focus a lot on the tech. Like, oh, how do we create the most novel algorithms? What is the best, hardware and so on, or the best algorithms? But you realize that when you are trying to create all these solutions, they are there to solve a problem, which is a human problem. Somebody has a problem. So you really need to actually focus on how does this benefit the society and benefit the people. So it's a more holistic view than rather just focusing on the technology. Yeah, so that was one of the challenges that I went through and learned. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anshul Sonak. I work for Intel. I am running education and innovation programs across worldwide on some of the STEM initiatives which we have. My challenge, it's a long story, but I come from an absolutely underprivileged rural India, central India background. So I learned how to speak English when I went in college. So from a pure non-techie, absolute disenfranchised to running global programs for a big tech company, every day is a challenge. And if I had to really summarize that, continuously reinventing yourself is a journey, and there is no one answer to that. If I had to really call out one or two things which has helped me is this mindset of learnability, learning to learn and learning to question. And I have nothing to lose, so just question. One thing which I really remembered in this entire STEM conversation was once in US, actually, we had a very serious conversation on why people lose from a STEM talent standpoint. And there was this institute called Right Questioning Institute. They shared a statistics, which was like 15 years back, but it stuck to me even today. So the statistics was when you're a 3-year-old, you ask 100 questions every day on an average. When you become 15-year-old, you ask almost 0 question. So that is a big STEM crisis we are facing today. And that is something which stuck to me. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, cool. I probably have a similar story. I think, I'm a product of the Singapore system. I didn't want to do engineering. This is actually a pretty funny story. So when I graduated from RJC in Singapore, my goal was to be a lawyer. And I applied to all the law schools in the UK, including in Singapore. And my mom said, well, actually, you should be a doctor instead. And so because she made me apply, I actually applied, like Danny. I went to NUS and flunked the interview. At the end of the interview that I had, this was the Dean of Medicine at the time, he said to me, young lady, I think you should study law and do biology on the side. And honestly, I was like determined that this was my path. I was going to be a lawyer. I didn't want to do engineering. In fact, as a triple science student, I was like, there's no way I'm going to college for another 4 years to do engineering or science. And so it's kind of ironic because what I ended up doing actually was I took a government scholarship. I didn't get into the one school that I really wanted to get into for law, and so I took it as a sign that the door was closed. And so I took a government scholarship, and in my final round interview, the government agency that I took a scholarship from, they said, this is the chairman of the agency. He said, young lady, you don't know what you want to do. This is the common theme, right? And I was like, absolutely know what I want to do. He's like, no, you don't. Look at your application. He's like, the majors that I listed, the first one I think was international relations. The second was economics, and the third was actually law. And here I was, I think I was like 18, arguing with the chairman of this agency saying, I absolutely know what I want to do. And I said, I want to go to the US and I want to study international relations. And he's like, I'm sorry, we can't, give you a scholarship to IR. And so they called me up the next day and they said, we like you, but you got to take a scholarship in engineering. And I was like, oh no. And up to the very end when I went to the US, right, because I applied to all the liberal arts, schools. I had to switch schools because they would only give me a scholarship for engineering, and that's how I ended up becoming an engineer. It's funny because I'm now running a tech startup, as you can tell from the name. So, it's a long story, but the point is, at 18 years old, you don't know what you want to do in life. And I'm an example of that.
I absolutely agree. I was a ski instructor for 4 years before I went to university, so I get that big time. Okay, so look, maybe let's move into the meat of things. Anshul, can I look to you? Maybe you can set some context for us. Why STEM is so important for countries? Why STEM is so important for Singapore?
I think if we just look around us in this so-called very volatile yet innovative world, whatever label you call it, fourth industrial revolution, right? Everything around. We are talking of a very different era than what was there 10 years back. Cyber, physical, biological systems coming together. And this innovation economy which we see around us is again very different from what it was during our times when we were just starting up our careers. So from a disruption standpoint, if you think about it, half-life of all corporations are shrinking. I mean, Fortune 500, it is far more blunt. We used to talk of 20 years in Fortune 500, now it is 10 years. From a career standpoint, we used to talk about maybe 2 careers, 3 careers a few years back for one person in 30 years of life. Now we are talking of 10 careers, right? From a job standpoint, we used to talk of maybe 3-year, 4-year longevity in a job or a role. Now we are talking of 2 years. From a supply side, if you think about it, which is even more starker, the education content which is out there is getting outdated just in 2 years, or even sometimes less, depending on which discipline you're talking of. So we don't know what kind of careers will be there, what kind of jobs will be there, what kind of an economic dynamics will be playing out in all countries we are in. So the question is, what do you learn? How do you really build yourself? You may be building a startup, you may be building your career, you may be as an employee, you may be building employability if you're a student. So whichever role you come from, right? A couple of things which always has stayed in last 100, 150 years of technology innovation driving economic growth, that progression is STEM careers, and STEM in a broader sense, and I will talk about broader sense in a minute. STEM careers have paid 10 to 15 to 30% more worldwide to people. So there is an economical value besides social value to that. There is a direct GDP impact, which is innovation economies outperform rest of the economies by 45%, McKinsey study. So there is a macroeconomical, individual, nationwide national competitiveness, all kinds of impact you see. There is an incremental gain you will see from a STEM standpoint. So the business logic is very clear in that sense. What gets misunderstood in this why STEM is it just a skill? Is it just a STEM? I think in that context of VUCA world or artificial intelligence, the questions which will hit people and which is hitting now as we speak, as we get into more AI and bot and everything else is, if AI can give all the answers, what can human do better? What does natural intelligence mean? So can we ask more questions? Can we, look at STEM in a little bit different way rather than just content acquisition standpoint or information and knowledge standpoint to this broader awareness of what human-machine partnerships can be. So in that context, the role of STEM and the STEM economy is also changing very fast, so to say. So for a country like Singapore, the second part of your question, Singapore is not a nature-based economy, right? It's a nurture-based economy, right? In that sense, you're not talking of natural resource, you are talking of innovation resource, innovation economy again. So for an innovation economy to excel and keep that competitive advantage in a long run, STEM and the STEM, both from a talent supply side as well as from a demand side, you have to think about, okay, what are the imperatives? What are the big gaps? What are the demand supply equation? And that's a very important conversation because the gaps are stark across sector. The demand supply gap, what we are building into the supply side, be it education, learnability points which we are talking, even at a startup level, again, coming to my point of disruption and half-life, that statistics is all there. So we have to prepare ourselves. And for Singapore, it becomes even more important because there is no backup.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's super interesting, and I especially want to come back to some of this human-machine interface and the future of work, because I think there are a lot of smart people getting very nervous about what the future looks like, right? So it's something I want to come back to just shortly. I know you've worked in the region here and also in the US. How do you think Singapore stacks up to these places from a supply side? So we think about people coming through, you're hiring in these sort of countries. How do you see this?
Do you want the politically correct answer or the non-politically correct answer? I mean, I think it's really hard to say. Look, honestly, like when you compare us to the Bay Area, for example, we don't really stack up the way that the ecosystem has developed, but it's a function of time, I think, right? Singapore's ecosystem is very new. And I think if I compared sort of my experiences working in the US, like the amount of talent that you can find in the US, I mean, you throw a stone, you'll hit an engineer who's probably trying to do something on the side, who's like, working nights and weekends, building a company. Here in Singapore, I find that, the people here are a little bit more inclined towards large companies. There's stability in large companies. It's a lot less risky. You get, in many ways, sort of a really nice sort of career path. And I used to work in a large company, so I can say this. Whereas, starting a startup or, going into science and engineering and actually wanting to, build technology, I think that's something that's still, from a mindset standpoint, it might be the education system, but the US is definitely still a lot more open-minded when it comes to that. So we've been having, the majority of the people that I've hired in my team are usually international. I have a Russian, an Indian, an Indonesian. It's not easy for us to find Singaporeans that actually want to work for startups, unfortunately.
Okay, so maybe there is something to do with some risk-taking culture or something like this that you see here in Singapore. Like, do you think that this is related to risk, or is it something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a function of risk and also willingness to fail. But I won't say it's a Singaporean thing, because I actually think it's like an Asian thing in general. Like, you know, like I was having an interesting conversation yesterday with one of my Indonesian guys on the ground, and we were talking about this young lady who, you know, we wanted to approach for a job. And, you know, he said to me, it's like, the reason why she doesn't want to join us is because she's worried that the startup's going to fail. And I was like, she's probably right. You know, 99%, I mean, this is a fact, 99% of startups fail. So the question is, why do it? Right, and I think the mindset of somebody who's more inclined towards like entrepreneurship or startups is that you're okay with failure. Like, I'm okay with failure. I'm okay if my company tanks. Not everybody thinks like that, and I think that's not normal to think like that. Actually, let's be clear. So like the abnormal crazy people are the ones who think like that, right? The normal people, the sane people, like your parents, are the ones that will tell you, hey, go get a good job, you know, make sure you have a steady income, don't go do something crazy. But society only progresses when you have crazy people who try to push the norm, right? I mean, in the US it's the same. I don't think that it's necessarily like a Singaporean thing, although an Asian cultural thing. I think you definitely get more risk aversity here, but it's just the way we are as human beings. We don't like change, we don't like taking risk.
Interesting. Okay, it's something I'll come back to as well in a little bit. Danny, I mean, Dot, you touched on something there about what your parents would say and things like this, right? Danny, I know you have three teenage boys, right? How do you think about their education compared to maybe how your parents thought about yours?
So certainly, you know, sort of back in the day, right? Parents were certainly very concerned about academic achievement and doing well in school, because there's this pathways of progression. You get to a good school, you get to university, and then you either join a big company or join the government. So that's kind of how the paths map out. And I suppose we are a product of that kind of society. And I think to Dot's point about fear of failure, I think the consequences of not being in that stream were maybe quite harsh, right? So you're not sort of given opportunities to ascend in the workplace and maybe in society. So I think until quite recently even, so the government has now thankfully sort of rolled back the policy where they had different tracks for scholars versus non-scholars, you know, versus degree holders, things like that. So those are the types of signaling that cement the kind of mindset about, oh, I've got to do really well in school because I've got to get my scholarship, and then so my life is set thereafter. So I think that's all beginning to change. I think it takes a while for the sort of super tanker to move direction, but nonetheless, if I were to compare 15 years ago, so I lecture at the National University, a course on pharmacology, and back then, end of the lecture, I'll hang around and the questions will go up, and it's mostly about the course material. So why does this drug work? Why doesn't that work? And the last few years, that's changed quite a bit. So I'm not getting those questions anymore. I'm getting questions about, I've got this startup, what do you think? You know, do you think it's worth trying? And I mean, I've never been in a startup. I'm not really in a position to really advise, I would say. I can give some technical views. But I would say that the young, even in universities, the idea that they can get out there and actually strike out on their own, try something a little bit different, not immediately jump into a corporate career, I think that's beginning to take root, and hopefully for the future that will signal a shift in the culture for Singaporeans. Okay. Yeah, and I think for my kids, I'm quite comfortable, I would say, for them to take certainly a less traditional pathway than what I've done, me and my wife.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I think, I know it's very intimate, but I do appreciate it, and I think it's I think it's a view that if embraced, we'll see a change, but it's a slow change, right? And I think of the faster changes that we could make to attract more STEM talent, and I think the one that could move the needle the quickest has to be gender diversity and attracting more females into STEM. I know it's a hard topic. There's no easy answer for it. But Huishan, I know that you shared, you got mistaken for the PA in one of your first meetings, right? How have times changed since then? Have you seen improvement? Is this still happening?
No, nowadays, I think people don't ask whether I'm a PA, but when I tell them that I'm from SMU, just like one of the attendees here, they thought that I'm a student. So, I mean, yeah. But that's okay. I took that as a compliment.
You're just young.
Yeah. You do.
Yeah. In the university, we're actually doing a lot of outreach events to really attract people, especially women, actually, or young girls to join. We have Women in Tech events that we encourage the kids to come. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to encourage our students to join the tech industry. Yeah. In terms of the prejudice, though, like whether a female in tech. Actually, I was just telling one of the students recently, actually I see it as an advantage nowadays because it's more, people want diversity, so that's one. One of my ex-colleagues who is now in a banking sector, so he messaged me a few months ago and he asked me, do you have someone to recommend to join my team? Then he said, I prefer a female. Then I said, but why do you specifically want a female? They said, we need to score diversity points. Then I said, are you only looking at females? Because I don't know that many female and very experienced technical persons. Then he said, well, males are okay, not preferred, but they're okay. But if they are male, I want their technical standard to be even higher. So I think the males are actually at a disadvantage right now.
I think maybe fear. I mean, do you want to jump in on this or?
Well, look, I mean, I hire the best talent. I don't care if they're male or female. I think the bottom line is you hire good people. I think women, I gave an interview recently about this. I think women in general shy away from science and technology because they somehow feel like they're not going to be good enough, which is nonsense as far as I'm concerned. Because I think a lot needs to be done in terms of encouraging, girls, young girls especially, right, to be willing to be curious. There's like a weird sort of gender bias associated with little girls who want to tinker with things, who want to build things, that's not like what girls are supposed to do, that's what boys do. And I think these are the types of things that as a society we need to like change, right? Because if we don't change that, then fundamentally we're not solving some of the root causes of why gender diversity is a problem, right? It's only a problem because not enough young girls are going into science, technology, engineering, and math, and if they did go into it, it's seen as you're not as good as the guys, which again, I think this is, these are some of the biases that exist in society, which if we don't change, we're not going to improve as a whole. But yeah, I mean, it is one of those things. I can't find women engineers. I want to hire good women engineers. So for me, it's not like, just because you're a girl, I'm going to hire you. Yeah. I'm female, so I can say that. But it's hard. It's still hard to find women talent.
Okay. Maybe we can go for a question.
Okay, thank you. So I wonder, you want to attract more people into STEM, but as we have limited supply, right? People just don't just pop up. Where do you want to draw them from? So what should people not do anymore? And what should they start doing in STEM then?
It's a tough one. Who wants that one?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. So you're asking like what skills you should have?
I think, to paraphrase, the question was, if we want more people in STEM, what skill sets do we want to stop them from being, essentially? If we assume that we have a finite number of people and we want more people in STEM, who loses out in this equation?
Banking, finance, professional jobs, lawyers, doctors. I think, Singapore doesn't have a lot of people, so if you redistribute sort of, profession-wise and look at where the majority of people are going into, when I graduated from junior college, there were 26 people in my class, 22 of them are doctors. I'm one of the 4 people that decided to do something other than medicine, and the other 3 are lawyers. So, it's sort of the odds are stacked against you if you're going through a science curriculum in junior college. Now, it's changed a lot. I think the best thing that we can do in society is actually to make STEM like cooler. And by cooler, I do mean wealth creation. So if you look at the US and you ask yourself the question, why do so many people in the Bay Area want to be entrepreneurs? They all want to be entrepreneurs because they look at people like Elon Musk. They look at people like Mark Zuckerberg. They look at people, they look at these I saw this article about some kid who's like 21 years old who like raised $100 million. So a lot of times, young kids like look up at these people because they say, hey, they have cool jobs, right? Like they're doing stuff that's really interesting. It's impacting the world. And I think to kind of shift that and attract more people into STEM, that's the kind of like success stories that we need.
Yeah, you've actually put your finger on a very tough question that government tries to answer, because, I've been on a trip overseas before where we've put up this big map of Singapore and says we've got an industrial sector in oil and gas, we've got something in we don't grow much in Singapore, but our food and food sector in Singapore has grown tremendously because through R&D, a lot of it that ASTAR is doing. You want to do biomanufacturing, you want to do financial services. And so a question that one very senior science and tech guy from, I think, Switzerland said, well, how many people do you have actually to do all of this? It's a very, very tough question. And so where do you want to draw it from? I think back to an earlier question about the sort of supply of scientists. I think science and STEM is fundamentally, to me, existential, right? The reason why science comes to the fore is really to make life better for people. So whatever it is, be it in terms of more energy efficient batteries or new drugs and things like that, it's basically just to make the human condition more livable and more convenient. So I think in that sense, the sort of remuneration for scientists and all that, I think that's certainly one way to incentivize people to come over. But more, the unique problem that Singapore faces is that we are just limited by the number of people. So we don't have a sink of people sort of sitting around that can maybe repurpose to one or discipline or another quickly. It's just too difficult. So I think one of the things that we feel we have to do, but of course it's politically sensitive, is how do we draw upon sort of people from the world, right? And that's why Singapore has maybe still a reasonably open policy to bringing sort of top-level scientists to Singapore, and that's really necessary, because if not, then for the initiatives that they want to go after, we just don't have the people. You just can't turn it around quick enough. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. I think.
Ask about the education system. Since we have limited people, don't you think there's time, really big time, now that things would change at the grassroots? I mean, this rote learning that we have across Asia. And to your point that people don't think, they don't ask questions. If you're going to be giving more emphasis to esports and get kids to, everything is on the computer, even their assignments are on a laptop, they don't go out and break things. How will they build them? So, inherently, I think there needs to be some change at the curriculum level, at the grassroots.
Sure. I think the bigger change which we believe is required is the mindset change from that older model of learn to work, school, college, PG, post-graduation, first job, second job, work, retire, right? Now in today's economy, when we have startups coming up all over and really changing the rules of the world in that sense, right? We have to figure out a different model of work to learn. You are working for learning. So culture of lifelong learning. In that sense, to be very honest, Singapore is slightly better or ahead. You take any global education innovation ranking, PISA being one of them, you are number one already, right? So the question is, where do you go from here if you want to make a change in education system? Some of the skills for the future, especially in context of STEM economy, and you have good diversity here, so you can see that visually, not so much in the room though, is how do we bring in more, I would say, learnability in that sense? What are the skills which are difficult to learn, which our education system is probably not teaching? And that's what is a question for curriculum experts. Resilience skill, ability to deal with failures, right? Growth mindset. Now, in the STEM economy, this becomes even more important. Rather than showing the evidence through an assessment or a test, but how do I really show the evidence of a resilience? That I'm okay to fail, not once, but twice. She rightly said that. So that skill at a high level as a resilience skill or a growth mindset skill is a more difficult question to insert in curriculum. And that's where probably educationists and industry practitioners like her and technology companies and the broader ecosystem has to figure out how do we make that systemic level change rather than a cosmetic change. And I think that there's a lot education guys are talking about it, but how can you actually role model failures, right? Not just for a sake of because it's cool to fail and all that, no. Building in resilience skill, building in grit, building in growth mindset, giving that message to the young guy that it's okay if you are not getting A+ or whatever grade, as long as you have that learnability or resilience mindset.
I think this is an issue of time as well. I listened to Josh McElwell from NEA talk at one of the A-Star events a month or so ago, and he was saying that the trees need to grow up in Singapore so that they can drop their seeds, and these seeds can then seed a new talent pool, but seed also, I think, some encouragement to the younger generation of saying, hey, there is success here. There is a path, a viable path here. Maybe we've failed a couple of times on the way here, but this is something, a path that does lead to success eventually. And it's not something that can be rushed.
And it's a role modeling as well, as she rightly said. I mean, how will you make that systemic change in the culture, in the thinking, right? When you have so much of our last 50 years of baggage of third industrial revolution where getting an admission into one of the premium universities is celebrated, getting a good grade is celebrated. So if you have to make that thinking, you have to celebrate some role models, right? And role models of all diverse type, not one particular gender or ethnicity or so on and so forth. And I think those are the conversations which education system has to come forward and do with the wider society. And apply system thinking rather than just programmatic thinking on educational interventions.
I will say one thing. So the difference between, so I grew up in the Singapore system, right? And I've always been super thankful for this because when I went to the US, I think the Singapore work ethic and discipline, and we're all mostly Asian, so, you understand where I'm coming from. When you go into the land of anything goes, growing up in the Singapore system where there's rigidity, there's, rules, there's stuff that you can't do in class, right? These are things that are really good habits. So I feel like there's a balance, It's not like we need to go all the way to the other extreme and, allow that kind of crazy sort of thing. Because I've seen when I was in college, I remember one engineering class I had as a freshman, and I remember this guy walking in half an hour late to class in a bathrobe. And I was looking at the professor because I was like, man, somebody needs to kick the guy out of class because in Singapore, there's no way that you would ever do that, right? You get kicked out in a minute. But the thing that I would say, the US system, what I liked about it and what I think really helped me, as a Singaporean going into the US was, in the US, there are no stupid questions. In Singapore, when I grew up, there's always stupid questions. If you ask a stupid question, you know it's a stupid question because your teacher. Oh, okay. So maybe now it's a little bit better, right? That's one. Number two, in Singapore, we're very focused on finding the one right answer. Right? If you look at the way the exams are designed, you look at the way that, we generally train our kids, there's always one right answer, and kids are trained to find that one right answer. They're not trained to find ways to get to an outcome. They're trained to find the answer that's in the answer book that's correct. In the US, I think final exams were crazy because, I remember this organic chemistry exam I had. It was a super complicated molecule. And you could get to that molecule however you want, but you have to start from carbon. There's no one right answer, so you could do whatever you want, right? But you have to figure out how to build the molecule. And I think that's a fundamental difference, actually, that I see between, an Asian sort of education, which is very geared towards training our kids to be very rigid and find that one right answer, versus the West, which is a lot more open, a lot more free form. And I don't think either is, necessarily the answer to the question that we're discussing. It's really a balance of both. Yeah.
So while we're on the topic, Hui Xian, I know from an educator's perspective, what have you seen as the changes that have been more impactful in this changing this kind of the system level thinking around some of the learning culture, attracting these sort of talents?
Maybe I just want to share 2 points. So the first one actually is something that we do at SMU called experiential learning. By the way, I'm not trying to sell SMU, but it's just something that I think was really beneficial. So for me, I was educated in NUS, I agree with Dot that the NUS curriculum actually is also a little bit, I mean, back then it was also a bit more rigid in that, you follow certain rules and so on. But over here, right now, we have a lot of more experiential learning. So for example, Dot actually came to one of my classes last semester to actually share with the students about her experiences in the startup. So that's one. Another thing that we try to do to make things more relevant for the kids, right, and get them more exposed to the industry early, is actually for them to work with industry partners right from the beginning for the course. Of course, there are pros and cons of this approach. This is all actually very good for the kids because, like I said, they get more exposure. For the industry partners, they actually have to spend time and effort because for a useful learning journey, the industry partner has to be very actively involved all the time, but this takes up the time, and the time, of course, could be spent better making money and so on, right? So, and kids being kids, sometimes they may not produce the level of results that are required to be used in the industry setting. So it may really be not much gain for the industry, more like a CSR kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's one aspect. Yeah. The second point is really about how, as educators, we also need to change the way that we teach. So previously in the past, right, when you study, it's always like, your lecturer goes through the materials, then you go back and do your tutorials or answer the questions, right? But over here, I personally think that interest is always very important, which is why just now when the gentleman was asking about how do we attract more people from, let's say, other industries to join STEM, I always struggle with that because I think that it's important to do what you like, but and be passionate about, because if your passion doesn't carry you through, then you may end up being very miserable. So to me, the way to get around it is really to make the subject interesting for the kids first. Then you try to attract them in that way. So make it interesting, don't scare them off, and then slowly you increase the level of difficulty. Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
I have a question. I'm Daniel, so I'm an entrepreneur. I have an EdTech social e-learning app. So I'm working with schools. I help educators to form teams within the classroom, and teachers can input tasks for them to do. So I'm actually piloting in Ngee Ann Poly in a bioengineering module. So one of the things that is quite successful so far. What I wanted to ask the group here is, do you guys have any ideas, assuming that the students are excited to form teams, come together and solve problems? Do you have any ideas or other suggestions of how else I can get the students to be more interested? So we are already bringing in industry partners. We're thinking of introducing storytelling to create personas about what they can be. Do you guys have any ideas or suggestions of maybe models that work in your domain that might be useful for that as well? Thank you.
You could help me to paraphrase the question.
I think maybe, it's an interesting subject. I think because maybe it's a little bit one-on-one answer, perhaps you can catch up afterwards, and we'll just continue for the time being. So, look, we've talked a lot about the supply side. I kind of want to arrow Anshul here and ask about how some of the corporates are thinking about this. We have Nobel laureates in economics who are absolutely freaking out about automation and what happens to people. And there is an argument that we're not going to have these conversations early enough at a national level or at a global level about what happens when there is automation. So corporates, I guess, have to balance this, right? They are investing in automation, but they have a workforce that they're trying to maintain and retrain and upgrade, I guess. What's Intel doing around this?
Yeah, you're right. This is probably the biggest conversation right now around the world, especially in the large corporations, on how do you responsibly manage automation. And at least the external narrative is very scary. Looking at which report you're reading, almost people project that 50% of any task with today's technologies can be automated. So does it mean 50% of jobs will get automated? That's a question. I think, and I play a lot in my own day job in what we call as AI readiness. in creating skill set, tool set, and mindsets for being ready for AI. So there are two aspects to this. There's a hard skill aspect and the softer skill aspect. The harder skills are probably going to be easier to automate. So from a leadership standpoint, you have to understand which hard skills will get automated, which probably should delay the automation, what are the right ways, so on and so forth. But the leadership, especially from the large tech company standpoint, comes into play when you start thinking about soft skill play. Especially when, you have various business models, bot base, and so on and so forth, which is impacting every industry. And every day it is touching us. On the softer skill standpoint, the issues which are becoming more critical is how do you communicate what technology is doing? Explainability, ethics. When there are biases, for example, we talked about some of that, and there are all kinds of biases: people bias, data bias, model bias, right? How do we communicate this? How do we look about it? So this, getting a good understanding of this, and then figuring out your own re-engineering or reinvention of your own company, that is where the leadership, especially the responsible leadership, comes into place. We did actually a research on this topic last year with Forbes and found out, and this was published in MIT Tech Review, the 3 types of skills which will become more important in this context, in context of soft skill as well, which corporations should play a more aggressive role. So explainers, sustainer, and trainers. I'm just giving a simple words, but you can read this research. It's available in MIT Tech Review, as I said. If corporations can bring that shift from hard skill to softer skill, and that's where the value of diversity, getting multiple people to come together, form new types of teams, this becomes even more important. So it's not just a technology problem anymore, it's technology plus cultural change also. If you're dealing with unknown, what do I strengthen? What is my base? So the human side of human-machine partnership, that becomes even more important. So it's not just a technology challenge. It's really speaking, it's becoming more and more leadership challenge. The bigger question is, should only big corporates be doing it? How can we democratize it? How can we get even every startup to start thinking about it? What role government and academia can play? How do we really demystify and democratize innovation skills and skills around AI readiness, as an example, in a very inclusive way? And not just for the big corporations or for the big academia, but for every startup, or for even 14-year-olds coming in a school. So that's exactly my day job. So if somebody's interested, we can talk offline.
I would guess that I don't think Intel, it's an amazing corporation, but I don't think Intel can manage this challenge themselves.
No, of course not. So when we say public-private partnership changing to human-machine partnership in that larger spirit, right, this really require a lot of new standards. So ethics, as an example, right? Ethics in AI is a very big topic around last 1 year. There are 5 different types of coalitions and standards coming up. Now, you have to really think about your own sector, right? So let's be specific to your job, your sector. What will AI ethics hit you in next 2 to 3 years? Not 10-year outline, right? And what should we do? Then get like-minded people, define standards and guidelines. Autonomous driving standards, totally new conversation, but I can tell you the kind of new jobs which are getting created are huge. Those skills are just not there. So you can't just leave it on one corporation or one academia to do it. This really requires a larger conversation then. Again, autonomous driving is a very hot topic, and hence I'm sharing it, but you can take it across. Nanotechnology or robotics or drone or whichever conversation you look at.
So Danny, I guess maybe I can ask you this tough one. We talk about this as maybe requiring an ecosystem change or a system level change, and there's different people in this ecosystem, right? There is the educators, the government, and industry themselves. Who do you think? I think everyone bears some responsibility to help make this change, but who do you think really needs to drive it and take on this responsibility? Is it industry themselves, or is this government and education really need to seed this and then industry run with it further down the road?
It's actually a really hard thing to try and sort of look into the crystal ball 5 years hence or 10 years and say, look, I need to up the numbers in a specific course because I'm going to anticipate in 10 years I'm going to need a whole lot of data scientists. That's really just beyond any system. And I've lived through that because coming from the medical side of the house, the Ministry of Health has gotten it wrong, in my lifetime probably 6 times already, right? So they've undershot, they've overshot, they undershot and overshot again. So just trying to do something as simple as trying to plan for manpower to staff hospitals and nurses, even that is so hard to do. So how do you get into this idea of diversity of the different technology fields? It is really challenging. I would say a few things do need to happen. One is that I think the mindset is that the first degree that you have is probably a start, not like in the past where maybe that was the end when you graduated with a degree or your PhD. So that's really just a starting point, and there's this concept, really hard to execute, but government sort of messages it sort of sanctions it and funds it to a small amount, is this idea of lifelong learning. So the ability for people who's in mid-career to say, look, I need to switch to something else, And you can do that for certain things. For other things, it's actually really hard to do, right? So how do you get to that? A slightly more radical idea that I've seen being pushed around is whether or not in this sort of new economy, that every 10 years, somebody needs to take a break and go back to school for another 3 years and learn a completely new skill set. Is that viable economically? I don't know. It's not really been done, I would say. So on a systems level, can that be done so that we can pivot people around quickly? Maybe that kind of sort of non-conventional approach to this needs to be done. And then I think the people themselves being accepting of this idea that you need to be flexible, need to, along the way, build some sort of buffer so that if you needed to change your career mid-flow, you could do it. I think part of the support systems that could happen in Singapore, and maybe that's one of the reasons at least why the entrepreneurship culture in places like the US is a bit more vibrant, is that maybe there are more safety nets and failure isn't viewed so badly. Whereas if you're really out of job for a year, you could still somehow live in a place and and get 3 meals a day. So that kind of support system, I think, does give people a little bit more confidence to say make a switch and not worry too much about falling off the edge of a cliff, right? So if those things were in place in Singapore that allows people to shift midstream, I think that would help tremendously. Because I think the idea that, look, can I look into the crystal ball and can I really forecast what's going to happen? So even in a sort of constrained industry like manufacturing of drugs in Singapore, we've got a big, in Tuas, we've got 20, 30 plants making drugs. And if Pfizer decided tomorrow, I'm going to double the capacity, they can't find engineers to come. It's something as simple as that. It's so hard to actually just change immediately. So I think beyond sort of the forecasting, the ability to be flexible and move quickly, both from government support level, but also individual level, I think that needs to be done.
And I think we will see a lot of pull from industry. They're the ones who are going to be having to manage a lot of this transition. So I think they are very aligned, at least, with managing this process. But it will certainly be an interesting future. And I think the future of work is something we could talk a lot about. I think, looking at the time, I think we'll close it there. Thank you all so much for coming. I'd like you to thank fantastic panelists. There will be some drinks and things like that afterwards, so if you have any specific questions, feel free to arrow some of these guys, and I hope you all enjoy your night. Thank you for coming down.
Do you have any influence over the